Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. And it's such a great thing to hear that we are focused on fitness. Health is so important. So very, very happy to be part of this Elite CISO group. Thank you so much for giving me the time. So when Priyanka and I were discussing, how do we set the context of why we're doing this? Why is optimizing your network or managing your end user experience, why is it so important? Why should you elite CISOs from India and wherever else you're dialing in from, care so much about these concepts? And it fundamentally boils down to one thing, right? So if you have a user experience problem, you have a security problem, right? We're all human beings. And if security tools get in the way of us doing our day job, our jobs, we will always find a way around them, right? So user experience is very important. And hopefully when you guys think about a SASE architecture, what makes a good SASE architecture, it's not just all of the different security components, but you must also think about the networking aspect and the user experience part of this as well. A good SASE platform should have a really good user experience. Really, it should be transparent from the user, right? So with that, let me jump into SD-WAN. So SD-WAN as a term was really founded around the early 2010 timeframe. I'll do a very brief history lesson, I promise, because it sets context to what I'm going to talk about next, right? So we know that back in the day, this industry kind of evolved from what used to be called as WAN optimization, and it was a very easy time. It was a centralized time, right? So people came into the office to do work. There was an MPLS circuit that connected them to a data center, and that's where we hosted our applications. And a very disruptive thing happened in the industry at that time. Companies like Riverbed used to dominate the space of WAN optimization, and now most people haven't heard of them, right? And this new concept of SD-WAN came, and fundamentally, I think two main trends really drove that adoption of SD-WAN. And I think of companies like VeloCloud and Versa Networks and Viptela and CloudGenix and so many companies that were founded during that time around the SD-WAN, when it really took off. And it was fundamentally, I think, based on two major trends. One is people started encrypting all of their information. So the adoption of encryption went up a lot. And so the old technologies of WAN optimization simply couldn't keep up. If you were doing compression, deduplication, or caching, all of those things simply stopped working. But probably the bigger trend is that it was the time of making internet circuits, those broadband circuits that become really ubiquitous, widely available for very good prices. So customers saw the opportunity. They said, hey, why should I pay so much money for my MPLS circuits? Can I replace it with a software-defined WAN infrastructure, right? So that's where SD-WAN came into place. And it was great because it was more cloud native, leveraging these SD-WAN circuits over simply commodity internet, replacing expensive MPLS circuits. Great opportunity. A lot of companies made a lot of money. Now that we're in this, the post-pandemic era, as I see it, we really are in this very distributed or hyper-distributed world that we live in, okay? So what is hyper-distributed? So applications are hyper-distributed, right? So we have applications that run in private data centers, applications that run in public cloud. We've got SaaS applications that people consume, and even IoT, right? So OT applications that are running in branch sites. You've got IoT devices everywhere. So we know that applications are hyper-distributed. But the other thing that's also distributed are users, right? So in this post-pandemic era, working from home or working from everywhere, that's not a luxury anymore. Almost every company has to deal with some level of remote workers, right? People that are obviously mobile and working from everywhere. So in this kind of hyper-distributed world, it's really like the first wave of disruption in the SD-WAN space. We're going through this next wave of disruption, which is the SASE phase. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is how does SD-WAN fit into all of this? Is it even relevant anymore in 2026? Should we even be talking about SD-WAN? What does it mean? And how does it fit into this overall SASE architecture? Okay, so let's get started. So I'm calling it reimagining SD-WAN, right? So SD-WAN, as I said, terminology from the 2010s. We're firmly in 2020s now. We have this big SASE market. Netskope is one of the leaders in this space. And thanks to Gartner for putting together this word. What is SD-WAN going to look like? How does it fit into the SASE architecture? And so I've come up with sort of 5 principles. My background has been in SD-WAN, and I've worked for Gen 1 SD-WAN companies before. And this is the market the way that I see it. And I think it's 5 really important principles. So if any organizations out there kind of considering what branch networking and connectivity and SD-WAN could look like in 2026, I believe these 5 principles are very, very important for thinking about it, particularly in this world of SASE that we live in. So the first one is branch networking, right? So SD-WAN has been around for a long time. The idea is quite simple. We put SD-WAN devices into branches. Could be retail stores, could be enterprise branch stores. And then we create this fabric, an SD-WAN fabric, basically a network that we can move packets around different places so that people can access applications and do their job. Very simple, branch-oriented, typically deployed in a hardware appliance kind of approach to SD-WAN. Nothing wrong with it. Problem is, we're obviously in this very hyper-distributed world. So most SD-WAN solutions deal with this, and I certainly have dealt with this in my career, which is that SD-WAN is great, except when the user gets up from that branch office and goes home or goes to the coffee shop or goes to the airport or goes to the hotel, suddenly we've lost complete visibility of that user, right? So in 2026, when we think about SD-WAN as part of a SASE fabric, we really see this convergence of zero trust network access and SD-WAN. So that complete VPN replacement, right? So when we think about SD-WAN, we really need to make sure that when we think of SD-WAN, this hyper distributed world that we live in, that we have an ability to run SD-WAN as a service on clients, so on laptops and on devices like that. And this has become a very critical component to SD-WAN when we think of it as part of that SASE architecture. So complete replacement of VPN and also optimization of applications. So when we were in the branch, we were taking advantage of these SD-WAN boxes that were doing WAN optimization. They were doing quality of experience. They were prioritizing traffic. They were using various mechanisms to help us compensate for poor links that might be there and give us a really good user experience. Why should we not have that for remote users as well, right? So extending SD-WAN to remote users and giving them the same quality of experience is a very important aspect when we think about SD-WAN in 2026. Then this concept of security in the cloud. Many customers, a lot of people had big investments in firewall technology. And we live in the world of hyperconvergence, right? So you can't argue against hyperconvergence. People want sort of one box, and they want as many things and features that that particular box can do. And that trend has been going on for a while. So many customers kind of ended up in this situation with, let's say, next gen firewalls, where it was doing SSL decryption and malware and threat, and all these different security features were there. But again, we ran into a whole bunch of problems, right? Of course, sizing a solution became very difficult because nobody knew exactly how much traffic is going to be there. Each firewall, of course, became a management point, right? So the larger your organization, the more branches you have, the more firewalls you have. We had this problem of scale and complexity. And many customers would end up outsourcing that. They would say, hey, some managed service provider, you come and manage this. But the biggest problem we ran into is, while that box-based security approach is great for people that were in the branch office, suddenly when you go and work from home, that just didn't work, right? So people would go and invest in something like an SSE architecture for remote users. So you ended up in this very fragmented, broken up world where we had one standard for people in the office and one standard for people working from home. Again, didn't really work very well. So in this modern world, what do we think about? I'm going to introduce this concept to you. It's called SASE gateway, right? So instead of thinking of it as a SD-WAN box, really what we're seeing is adoption of what are called lightweight SASE gateway devices, right? So instead of doing security in the box, let's leverage security in the cloud. Companies like Netskope, but many other companies out there, have a huge investment in these security private clouds and security cloud architectures across the world, with all the SSL decryption and SWG and CASB and DLP and all the security features you could possibly want, without me having to worry about what size of box do I need to buy, right? Because it's a cloud service, it's elastic. So as long as I put a very thin, lightweight router kind of device somewhere in the edge of my network, and I can forward all my traffic to the cloud, that's the architecture that we're looking for in a SASE world, right? So light, thin gateway device, ideally something that's simple and easy to use, that can scale really, really well, maybe SaaS managed, with some east-west security controls in the box, right? So most customers will do most of their security in the cloud, but there'll always be a little bit of east-west security controls that we still need, and a gateway should really still be able to do that, okay? And a global backbone. So when SD-WAN started out, very simple, we had a bunch of branches, and we would have these tunnels between different branches, between different data centers. In this day and age, we have this concept of a global backbone, and that can really boost the value of an SD-WAN solution, of a networking solution, right? So this is a classic example. You might say here, you've got an Indian company on the left-hand side. It has a branch in India, and they're hosting some private applications, let's say in a data center in India. And then they have a US branch office, and let's say there are some remote users in the US as well. All well and good. Usually what would happen in an SD-WAN fabric is you would just establish tunnels over these very long distances, and we would create an SD-WAN fabric, and we would use some compensating mechanisms to make sure everybody had a good experience, right? But in this day and age, we have the luxury of some global backbones. So instead of thinking about SD-WAN fabric purely as a topology that customers own and manage, we have the ability to go and leverage these investments we have in global backbones. Netskope has something called our new edge network, and AWS has theirs, and Azure has virtual WAN. There's many different offerings out there. But these days, an SD-WAN solution or a SASE gateway has to be able to work with these global backbones, right? So we're only establishing tunnels, let's say in our local region to our local POP location, and then we're leveraging some form of very predictable, high performant, high quality network that can connect users and devices and branch offices across vast locations, right? So the other big benefit of this is used to be that SD-WAN and WAN optimization could only work if you had two boxes on either side. But what about SaaS applications? I can't go and put a box inside of Salesforce.com. But if I'm leveraging a global network like this, a global backbone, then I can have SD-WAN services running in the cloud. So I can optimize SaaS applications. I can even optimize things like Microsoft Teams or Zoom. It doesn't really matter that it's a SaaS application. I can optimize those. So really making SD-WAN and SASE very relevant in this world of hyper-distributed applications. Okay. Then we have branch networking. So, one aspect is managed users. So we know that managed users are sitting in these offices. Great. They usually run a client. So we can secure them. That's not a problem. But we also have a lot of other things in branch offices. What do we have? We have unmanaged devices. We have guest users who can just walk in. We have IoT devices. We have printers. We have cameras. We have smart TVs. In my own house, I have so many smart devices. So of course, we can imagine in a retail store or a manufacturing site or even an enterprise branch office, we have so many IoT devices, right? So the other very important function of SASE gateways is we really need to be able to extend that zero trust security that we can do using the client on devices to all of these other things that we run in the branch network. So it's a very important function. So that could be many things. And it really helps us enable what Gartner calls the coffee shop network, okay? So in their SASE Magic Quadrant and their SASE critical capabilities, Gartner coined a term called the coffee shop network. So they're calling it the future of networking is a coffee shop network. Why do they call it a coffee shop? It's just a reference to a zero trust environment, right? So you think about a coffee shop, if two people are walking into a coffee shop, they have no business accessing each other's information. It's, you don't trust anyone else, right? They're all different users. So we want enterprise branch offices to become like that, a zero trust environment where people can go in, reasonably easy get access to the network because we don't have a lot of privilege, right? So just because I connected to the network doesn't mean I can access anything. I just want internet access. And so we can use technologies like ZTNA or SWIG or SD-WAN to extend zero trust security to all the devices. So SASE gateways can really enable that kind of a coffee shop network experience where we can drastically reduce cost, make it much simpler, and also users have a very consistent experience. If it's easy for me to work from a coffee shop or my home or somewhere else, when I come into the office, I should have a consistent experience just like that, right? So that's the idea of a coffee shop network. And we can achieve that by extending zero trust security to all of those devices, perhaps that are not running a security client, for example, right? So that's another big function. Finally, if I'm going to put hardware, into a branch office, whether it's a retail site or a manufacturing site or a branch office, ideally, I want to be able to run some applications, right? Most customers have IoT applications or things that need to run close to the workload, maybe close to the devices. And so it's very important, I think, in SASE gateways, when we think about them, that ideally it should be an x86 architecture, something that I can put in place, add functions as I keep going on, something that's a simple, standard hardware platform, but from a software point of view, it has the ability to expand and add more functions, particularly around AI applications, IoT applications. We see many use cases out there, but this idea of being able to add edge services onto a platform is critically important, right? Critically important in this day and age, right? So those are the 5 principles that I'm going to leave you with when we think about what is SD-WAN in this world? What is it part of a SASE architecture? Here are some of the big, I think, changes that we've seen and the big factors that are driving people to consider these new options that are available. Okay. So let me quickly introduce Netskope One SASE, and then I'm going to break out into a whole bunch of real-life user case studies that I'm going to share with you. So of course, Netskope One SASE, we have a SASE gateway offering. All the principles that I've just shared before are very much part of the solution that we take to market. This product fundamentally came into Netskope as part of an acquisition. So one of the co-founders of 𝐒𝐿𝐼. In 2018, he quit and started a new company focused on IoT security. He called it 𝐸𝐵. In 2018, he founded the company. 2022, he made the decision to sell to Netskope, right? So from 2022 to now, we've been integrating this basically market-leading IoT security and SD-WAN solution with the rest of the Netskope SASE architecture to really take to market the single vendor SASE approach. So all the principles I spoke about, apply, which is thin, lightweight gateway device, leveraging predominantly cloud-based security, simple security on the box for east-west controls. It's got a lot of IoT visibility and security features built in. That's a big focus for this solution. How do we extend security to those devices that aren't running the Netskope client? And it's a compute platform, so it's x86 based and allows us to add more and more functions, other applications that can run on this platform, right? So all of the principles that I just spoke about as an offering from Netskope. And of course, it's so important for us that in this hyper-distributed world, we can't just have branch networking looked after. We need to be able to do the same optimization for remote users. So we have SD-WAN client. It's part of the Netskope SASE client. It's just another tunnel, and we can quite often redirect voice and video applications and a whole bunch of other use cases over this tunnel so that user experience is absolutely maintained, okay? In the inaugural Gartner SASE Magic Quadrant, we were placed really well. We were positioned really well, which is a great validation for us of the approach that combining Netskope SSE and 𝐸𝐵's IoT and SD-WAN capabilities is definitely resonating in the market. But more than Forrester Wave and Gartner Magic Quadrant, I believe our customers will vote, and this is what we really appreciate. So we have a little over 650 customers, 23,000 SASE gateways deployed globally, and about 2.1 million users using the SD-WAN tunnel. Okay, so with that, I'm going to spend a little bit of time in real-world actual customer case studies, and then I'll hand over to Priyanka to talk about digital experience. Okay, so classic example here is an Indian company. They're a major player in technology services space with 15 branch offices, 100,000 staff. They were on a journey with us around Netskope SASE. And what they found was they had a number of users who were using Netskope SASE, but then a number of users who weren't remote users, who were predominantly based in the office. And what they were doing was using traditional firewalls, next-gen firewalls, and effectively just using simple URL filtering to filter the internet traffic for those users. So they ended up in this world, which many customers do, where they have one set of users using one product and another set of users using a different product. Nothing unusual. We end up in this situation. But of course, from a cost point of view, that was just too much for them, right? So wasn't an ideal architecture. They could have been blind spots, and also just very expensive solutions. So they went with a single SASE approach. They replaced their firewalls with Netskope SD-WAN appliances, with lightweight gateway devices. And what it could do is effectively capture traffic from any user. It doesn't matter if they're running a client or not running a client, managed, unmanaged, doesn't really matter. And pass everything to the SSE for inspection. And they were able to use different tiers of filtering to get a really optimized cost solution for them, right? So very heavily cost-driven approach here, but very much about centralizing and consolidating on a single vendor SASE platform, okay? Another one is a large bank in India. This is another very typical use case for Netskope, where a customer had a number of clients and software agents for security purposes that were running on their devices, right? So a VPN solution, a DLP solution, and maybe even an SSE. But in this case, what they did was they enabled all of those things on Netskope, but they also added the SD-WAN tunnel for 45,000 users. So we can now pass voice and video traffic over that tunnel and do optimization for that, right? So again, one unified client. It also does digital experience, which Priyanka is going to talk about in a minute. So a single unified client that does all of these different things for this very large Indian bank, okay? This is one that I'm personally close to. It's an Australian customer, the largest provider of medical imaging in Australia. What they did with Gen 1 SD-WAN, a company that I used to work for before, is they gave all of their users an actual hardware physical appliance to take home and work from home. So there's predominantly doctors, radiologists, and they were doing their work from home. A lot of them were based out of their home office and working from home. But the voice dictation application and a number of other applications simply wouldn't work when they were working from home. So what they found is when they implemented a Gen 1 SD-WAN solution, so a physical box that each doctor took home, that they were able to make those applications work, right? So the optimization, the quality of experience tools that were available there was great, job done, fantastic solution. This customer eventually went on the Netskope SASE journey with us, and what they did recently is effectively replaced all of those physical devices and just dropped a Netskope SASE client on those devices. So basically replacing hardware with software. So you can imagine it's much more simpler and easier to manage because it's all a software solution, and also huge cost saving for this customer as well. Okay. Another, pretty classic use case where we've got a firewall that's been deployed. In this case, it's a global travel retailer, so about 5,000 locations. Very classic. You got a firewall, a Gen 1 SD-WAN solution, and an SSE architecture of some sort, an SSE vendor that does a lot of the inspection in the cloud, right? And so they moved to a unified architecture with us. So get rid of the firewalls, get rid of the Gen 1 SD-WAN solution. They were on a journey with Netskope to do the SSE anyway. And what they did was put these unified SASE gateways in place, which for them does 4G, 5G sort of LTE connectivity and supports a bunch of wireless communication, does the simple security that they need to do in the box, and also seamlessly integrates them with the SASE architecture. Okay. Another example here is about multi-cloud networking. So this is a financial services company. Predominantly, they're a software developer for financial services. They're based in North America. And they have a large footprint in public cloud infrastructure, so AWS, Azure, as well as GCP. And they were running virtual firewalls in each one. So what they did was replace that with a Netskope SASE gateway solution running in each of those. And that basically allowed them to create this multi-cloud fabric, and also what they call as one-click SSE integration. So because we're the SASE gateway and we're also the SSE provider, we have very seamless integration, right? So there's literally a single click, and any application, machine, or software that's running in the cloud, any internet traffic will automatically go to Netskope for inspection. So this is a real agility play for this customer. They were able to be a lot more agile once they went with the Netskope SASE gateway multi-cloud architecture. And here we have a retailer. So it's a supermarket provider. So you can see 500 sites, but over 5,000 devices. So they had an SD-WAN solution before. They actually moved to Netskope for SD-WAN predominantly for IoT security. They felt that they had no visibility of IoT devices, and they really liked the IoT security aspects of our SD-WAN solution. And so they went with the product. What they found is there was about 40% of the devices in the network they had no idea existed. Okay, so this is a pretty large attack surface, something that you can't even protect. If you don't know it exists, you can't even configure policies to protect it. So discovery becomes such an important aspect. So they went with the Netskope SD-WAN, discovered all of these IoT devices, and eventually applied the security policies to control them. And the way that we did that is to integrate with their Aruba wireless and NAC controls, which we can do, and we can integrate with a number of wireless vendors. And so if we detect network anomalies and malicious traffic, we can integrate with the NAC controls and block that device or isolate that device, right? So some hopefully useful examples of real world SASE gateways and how SD-WAN fits into this new SASE world that we live in. So that's it. Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Priyanka. She's going to dig deeper into digital experience management.
Thanks, Vignesh. With that, let's dive into DEM. And with the stage that Vignesh has set, this should make for a very interesting discussion. I'm Priyanka Pani. I'm Senior Director of Product Management here at Netskope. And as we dive into digital experience management, I really want to start with some of the premise that Vignesh already said, and he alluded to as he talked about how our customers operate today, what they're looking for, and what's the mindset they bring to the table as they're considering adopting SASE or SSE, right? So what does DEM or monitoring solutions largely bring to the table? The objective for products like these as part of an integrated platform, when you're looking at, whether it's SASE, whether it's SSE, really is that every end user's experience ought to be so reliable, it should be so stellar, and it should be easy to understand end to end, such that regardless of which device they're operating from, regardless of whether they're operating from, whether they're connecting from home, whether they're in the office, or whether they're sitting in the coffee shop, that level of visibility is consistent and clear, so that network and IT teams are able to pivot from that reactive firefighting loop, that troubleshooting loop that they're in, to proactively being able to optimize and manage end-to-end digital experience for an organization, right? That's the eventual objective. And this objective takes into account all of the services that you're running in a SASE or an SSE stack as your end users are going about their day, as they're attempting to be productive day in and day out, right? Now, these objectives largely, or this objective largely borrows from the fact that it relies heavily on being user-centric. If your user's frustrated, if your user's not being able to be productive, then that sort of fails, all of the other pieces of the puzzle. There is nothing else you can do if your users aren't being able to be productive. So the objective of this product is to center experience around the user. The second aspect is, in order to accomplish this objective, you need that end-to-end visibility. You need accountability of every single component that sits between your user and the end destination, so that you can very clearly identify which contributors are detracting from the user's experience versus those that are, optimizing and improving the user's experience consistently. Now, all of these pieces so far that we've talked about really boils down to the fact that you need the right and the appropriate and adequately provided telemetry, so that you have an evidence-based approach to being able to say, hey, I know why my user is not being productive and I can resolve it, right? So your data needs to be actionable. Your analytics needs to have a clear call to action. Only then can you really get to being proactive. And finally, this objective cannot be accomplished unless you have proactive remediation capabilities, right? The product needs to enable that proactive detection and remediation of issues, so that you're constantly ensuring your users are productive and you're constantly ensuring that critical business outcomes can be accomplished. Now, how does Netskope One then do all of that? I'll start with this. When we started building them about 4 years ago, there were a lot of monitoring solutions in the market. And, we had the benefit of being able to learn from things that went well and things that didn't go so well with a lot of these distributed monitoring systems that we saw across the space. And it boils down to how the product objective and all of the components of the product objective that I talked about right before this. When you look at the user, what Netskope then really focuses on is ensuring that the user's experience can be accounted for end to end. And you'll see in the midst of that, there is this lovely little new edge cloud that's sitting. Netskope is one of the contributors and needs to have the same level of accountability as any of the other components in this piece. So what Netskope then, when it monitors a user, when it optimizes a user's experience, it looks at through the Netskope client, which is your one agent that does steering, but also does monitoring, right? Whether it's through the Netskope client, and for unmanaged devices, if you should choose to use, we have the DEM browser extension. Through these agents on the device, you have the ability to look at the life of the packet end to end. Now, you have accountability of local connectivity through the Wi-Fi. You have accountability of every single hop in your internal network, all the way through your ISP into Netskope and beyond Netskope, accounting for connectivity to the application performance, and being able to have all of these pieces stitched together to be able to answer a very clear, concise question. Is my user's experience good, bad, or ugly? And if it is not good, if it is anything but green, what is causing it? What that really focuses on is making sure you have that clear, well-articulated picture of what happened that impacted your user's productivity and how you can go about fixing it. Now, one of the things that we also recognized is, as our customers started using them and as we've seen the use cases and I would say largely the deployments that we see, the complexity of the networks that we see, as we've seen them evolve, we also realized that in addition to the user, the site was a very significant component of that cumulative digital experience for an organization. And with that in mind, we actually introduced a dedicated monitoring component for sites, which provides you with an always-on, non-user reliant monitoring mechanism, such that you can actually deploy it on-prem. You can spin up a VM, deploy it, and continue monitoring consistently from any site. You can also deploy it on our SD-WAN devices and utilize it to consistently monitor traffic that either flows through Netskope or even bypasses Netskope, so that you have that cumulative, comprehensive 360-degree view of your digital experience across all the traffic that is critical to your organization, whether it's steered through Netskope or bypasses Netskope, right? Now, when we look at the fidelity of the user and the site, it is very important that the data, if you remember the third point, be actionable. You need to have that actionable analytics. And in order to accomplish high accuracy, highly actionable data, we actually brought together a few sets of technologies, if you will, in the monitoring space to accomplish this. Now, what Netskope then cumulatively accomplishes for you is it brings together the user and site context so that you have one single pane of glass where you can see how your users are doing, how your critical sites are doing. Now, when you look at users, you can actually drill down to their endpoint health as it contributes to your user's experience. So you very clearly can articulate my user's not able to be productive because their device isn't operating optimally. Now, in addition to that, we're able to stitch together, we're able to correlate everything that we see when they're using specific applications, right? We can tell you that because I see that this user's device is operating fine, their Wi-Fi connectivity looks fine, ISP status looks fine, but your application performance is impacted. We're seeing the server response time being significantly high, and as a result, this specific application is the one that's contributing to a loss of productivity for your end user. Now, context is extremely important because when you're investigating or when you're accounting for experience productivity for a user or a site, it is very important to be able to have a highly accurate view of what happened at that point in time that caused the issue. Now, this is where what we've been able to do is very unique. Our approach has been very unique, right? We haven't chosen one or the other mechanism of monitoring. We haven't chosen either synthetic monitoring or real user monitoring. We've actually come up with a mechanism called SMART, which stands for synthetic monitoring augmenting real traffic. So what this does for us is we're able to use both real user monitoring and synthetic monitoring blended seamlessly to be able to give you the most accurate picture of what happened to the life of that packet as it went from your user's device through your local connectivity, through Netskope onto the application and back. Now, what this results in is granular telemetry that, by the use of AI ML capabilities that we offer, turns into very clearly articulated incidents and alerts so that you have a very clear picture of what went wrong and to what degree did that degradation occur and what can you do to fix it. Now, when I started talking about them, one of the things I pointed to was that lovely little cloud, right? We do understand the need for transparency when it comes to accounting for Netskope as part of that end-to-end path. So what happens here is in that user experience articulation, we do account for time in Netskope. We do account for how much processing time Netskope contributes that makes your user's experience good or bad. And we do that by making sure we take into account the policies, the services that are being utilized as your user's transaction is being processed, as Netskope is applying policies on top of it and such. Now, when you look at this, it really does cover the true 360-degree view of every single component that impacts your user and your site's experience and gives you a cumulative digital experience posture for your organization. Now, what this helps you as an organization accomplish are a few specific use cases, right? Like some key use cases. First is when you look at that left to right picture, you can have the ability to very clearly monitor your critical SaaS applications, your critical private applications, and you can continually test how these business critical apps are performing day in and day out for a subset of users, for a set of sites, to very clearly identify whether it's the application itself that is actually contributing to problems for you, or whether the issues lie in your local network, whether it's your ISP, whether it's even your SSE or SASE stack, in this case, Netskope, or any form of service provider, right? You have that very clear articulation for your business critical applications. The second aspect is with that end-to-end visibility, you have this hop by hop view that tells you very clearly what in that path caused a problem. Is it your ISP? Is it your cloud service provider? Is it your private WAN? You can actually pinpoint which node caused latency or had a significant amount of loss, and as a result impacted one or more applications, one or more users. You have that clear end-to-end visibility to drive that level of troubleshooting and remediation. Now, the reality of the world has changed over the last few years, and hybrid workforces have just become the norm, right? We do see a lot of organizations that optimize for a good sort of remote and in-office experience for their users. Now, In this scenario, you need that consistent visibility no matter where the user is operating from, whether they're sitting in the office connecting through your corporate Wi-Fi, or whether they're sitting at home and connecting through their home Wi-Fi where you have their family members streaming Netflix from. You need that clear, consistent visibility end to end in order to be able to say, is it the endpoint that's causing the problem? Is it local connectivity? Or is it the application or any other component that lies in that path end to end that's causing this issue? Another significant piece, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit when I was talking about site experience and the enterprise station, which is the site monitoring agent, always on experience assessment. Now, what does this mean for organizations that want to have that 24/7 visibility? Now, you need the ability to be able to constantly test connectivity performance and accumulate these other critical metrics across all of your critical applications from your key users and sites all the way to the application in a manner that you can detect these issues before end users start getting impacted and report them. In fact, to this end, one of our customers actually said that they would prefer to know that there is an issue brewing on Sunday afternoon so that they can fix it before their users log in on Monday 9 a.m. And that is where your always on experience assessment is very important. And this is where that balance between your user and site monitoring becomes very critical, because you do not want to be reliant on only one source of monitoring in order to have this always on 24/7 experience assessment. And finally, and this continues to be a very, very important topic for a lot of our customers, uh, proactive outage detection and incident response. For every organization, it is important that a DEM solution can detect, alert, and provide you clear visual evidence of any form of outage, whether it's your internet, whether it's your local network, whether it's a cloud provider. You need that clear visualization, that clear evidence of the outage, the contributor to that outage, and be able to correlate that back to whether it's application performance or user productivity, such that your leadership continues to have a very clear picture of what that impact really manifests in terms of business outcomes, right? So these are some of the key use cases we do see our customers look to accomplish, look to solve for, look to address through a solution like Netskope on DEM. And we do see them accomplish this day in and day out. And we hear about some really, really great scenarios where DEM has been able to assist them in their desired outcome. Now, we talked about use cases, right? We talked about what are these problems and why they need to be solved. I'll pivot the same set around and say, okay, if we did solve, as we solve all of these problems, what is the eventual value to these key stakeholders that we see, we talk to day in and day out? And how does it make their lives easier day in and day out, right? How does them make it easy for attendees, our attendees that we have, for you day in and day out? How does it make sure you are able to amplify your productivity? How does it help you operate in your role better? Now, for executives, it really gives you that clear, well-articulated picture that helps you protect your employees' productivity, ensure that you're constantly optimizing for your organization's revenue, such that you have metrics, you have actual data to back it up. In addition to that, for an executive, right, it is very important to have vendor accountability. And that is where DEM comes into play by proving whether it's your SaaS, whether your SaaS applications, whether it's your ISP or any other middleware service, that is actually the bottleneck. That level of visibility, that level of aggregated view is very important for executives to be able to accomplish their roles. Now, another critical stakeholder that we do end up seeing is the help desk admins. Now, for the help desk admins, it is very important to expedite that ticket resolution. And they need to be able to do this with a very simple view that correlates device health, Wi-Fi, ISP, or any other contributor for that matter. Now, it is important that the solution, Netscope DEM, answer that. Is it the user? Is it the device? Is it the network or the app? It helps answer that question for these help desk admins without requiring an escalation to the engineers, essentially making sure that it optimizes for operational efficiency. Another critical stakeholder that we see is the IT operations team. And for them, what continues to be important is faster incident triage, right? Whether it's apps or it's networks, provide that level of visibility so that they're able to route tickets correctly. They're able to, assign it to the right team to operate on it appropriately. Now, in addition to that, what amplifies the value for them is proactive detection of any kind of SaaS or network issues before users actually have to click that button, open a support ticket, and report the issue. Yet another stakeholder in this picture is the network operations team. And for them, what's important is to have that end-to-end path visibility so that there is very clear attribution of where the loss or latency arises from, so that, again, for them, it provides them with that constant assessment of how your SD-WAN, SSE, SASE, or even your branch sites are operating, so that you have a clear performance validation, so you can perform optimizations, you can perform upgrades, you can perform maintenance with very minimal overhead attached to it. And finally, network admins. Now, for network admins, a lot of focus goes into having that hop by hop troubleshooting view, such that they can again identify when they're looking at sites, when they're looking at users, whether it's the SD-WAN, ISV applications, any of these components. They need that hop by hop granular view in order to be able to troubleshoot effectively and in an expedient fashion. In addition to that, for network admins, it's very important to be able to validate that any new policies or traffic routing configurations that they're putting into place. And Vignesh talked about a variety of these scenarios where, as they've been optimizing, it becomes important for them to ensure that not only connectivity, but also stellar experience is being sort of maintained. So with that, all of the scenarios that we talked about, all of the use cases that we talked about that DEM solves for, this is how it's perceived by some of our key stakeholders. Now, with that, I do want to pivot into a real world example, right?
Sorry to intervene, Priyanka. You are running out of time. It's 11:45. Maybe a couple of more minutes you can take, right? 2 minutes.
Sure thing. I'll wrap up the real world example and then we can dive into the other fun stuff. So very quickly, the customer that we're going to be talking about, without naming names, about 70K users and 400 sites that they were monitoring. And they were primarily, a large part of their users were based in North America. Now, what did their worldview look like, right? And I'll make this really quick. They were looking at about 70,000 users. And at that scale, right, any small hardware inconsistency is not just some minor lag. It is a massive invisible productivity leak for that organization that your traditional distributed monitoring systems just cannot find. Now, before they actually employed them, they had a situation where they had a subset of users that had performance degradation. And eventually, it took them about 90 days of flying blind, trying to manually correlate data, essentially what they called as 3 months of chasing ghosts, to be able to identify that the problem was an agent that they had deployed on a subset of endpoints that was causing a compute spike on these endpoints. Now, this was 90 days, and I kid you not, 90 days of trying to run around, look at network latency, application performance across multiple different products and try to correlate them, try to create a consistent perspective that would help multiple teams align on what is the problem and what do they need to remediate it, right? And the outcome of that exercise was 90 days of significant operational overhead, increased mean time to detection and remediation. And really what it meant was frustrated employees and an IT team that was stuck in this reactive firefighting loop. Now, after DEM entered their world, similar situation that occurred, and the narrative changed completely for them, right? It went from chasing ghosts to reacting with precision at speed. Now, what ended up happening, and in this case, there was hard data to support this, was they actually used DEM to find a subset of endpoints, again, that actually had a faulty RAM, and that contributed to a very significantly high memory consumption being identified by DEM on a multitude of devices. Now, for the same IT team, what it meant was they could actually see the memory consumption spike on these devices. It was a single click to identify which users they were seeing those issues on, validated it, and they were actually able to condense what was a 90-day investigation session to a same-day resolution scenario. Now, that itself, the bottom line there is it is about ROI and sentiment, right? the transition to them wasn't just about fixing these point problems. It was about that being time to remediation for them. And when they're collapsing a 3-month investigation into a few months of looking at data and looking at very clearly articulated RCAs, it really meant they were saving thousands in manual overhead. They were including, it really translates into cost savings and avoidance, even reduces tool sprawl, as well as ensures that you're drastically and proactively improving end user experience. Now, I'll leave you with this. And this is a verbatim statement from that customer. For them, bringing them into their world meant they had moved, and in their words, it just meant we've moved from asking our users what is wrong to telling our users we know what is wrong and we fixed it already, right? And that is how they're planning to scale their IT and networking for 2026. There cannot be a better testament than that for a customer that has adopted them and has seen the value of that. So with that, let me flash a very quick screen for you guys, just as a quick takeaway of the strategic differentiators that DEM brings to the table. And with that, Vikas, this is my last slide, and I'm happy to hand it over to you with leaving that up there, and we can dive into next steps.